him in position. I mean, I'm the one that set off the alarm.
You still have a purpose in this life, brother.
You saved me.
Run home, kid. It ain't safe out here.
All right, welcome everybody to the BlizzCon 2016 panel for the Overwatch animated shorts. How's everybody doing? Thanks for coming out. I am Kevin Vanderjagt, the producer for the animated shorts. And with me today is Ben Dye, director of Recall, Dragons, and The Last Bastion. Shimon Cohen, overall CG supervisor for the episodes.
Howdy.
Corey Pelton, animation lead for Alive, Hero, and Infiltration.
What's up, guys?
Bill LaBarge, our effects lead for Recall, Dragons, and also Infiltration. And Dan Cox, the overall lighting supervisor for the episodes. So just 2 years ago to the day, Blizzard Entertainment announced Overwatch. And for that announcement, the team here at Blizzard Animation produced an absolutely stunning 6-minute cinematic trailer that not only introduced us to the world, but also some of its most iconic heroes, villains, and it really set the stage for what fans could expect from the franchise going forward. But what many of you may not realize is that that cinematic took over 12 months of pre-production and production from start to finish, and required over 300 man-months of artist labor. But regardless of the cost, it was really clear from the community reaction that the fans wanted more. And when Blizzard got together with the heads of the department, they had one simple question: how do we tell more stories? The answer, unfortunately, is never as simple, and the road we took to get from there to here is predominantly what we'll be talking about in today's panel. Now, in order to accomplish that goal, to tell more stories, it was going to require us to produce the same amount of content as the cinematic trailer, but in a quarter of the amount of time and with less than half the artist resources per episode. And that meant at any stage we'd have as many as 3 episodes in production simultaneously. So to release 6 episodes in the last year meant we were really going to have to change not only our production process, but also the technology that we use under the hood to accomplish that goal. But before we get too far into all that, it's probably best we start where every episode starts, the process of creating great story. And no one's better suited to that than one of our very own directors, Ben Dye. Ben?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So, story. Let's talk about how we make these stories. For the episodics, we did something a little different. We did a whole lot of collaboration with the game team. We identified a bunch of stakeholders from the game team, which included Jeff Kaplan, Arnold Sang, Bill Petrus, and Michael Chu. And they will come over to our side of the building maybe 2 times a week, meeting and try to break the story, figure out what we try to do. On our side, we have Chris Metzen, James Wah, Jeff Chamberlain, all the episode directors, and the writers. So every story came from an idea or a theme. And anybody in that brain trust can pitch an idea. So once we have the idea, we go on to the story beats. And the story beats basically are sequence of events that supports the story. And sometimes we even go as far as drawing some of these beats out in storyboards that we call beat boards. I'll get to that later. And so once we have all the beats, approved and ready to go, the writer would start writing the script for all the episodes. Basically, they take all the beats, put them in a sequential order, flesh out all the dialogue in VO, and making sure that the story is entertaining to read on paper. Now that we have our script approved, we start our pre-production. And the first stage of pre-production usually involves concept drawings. We start with our blue sky concept period. Basically, the director will pitch the story idea to a group of extremely talented concept artists, and they just go draw. There's no wrong or bad ideas. All of these drawings are super inspirational. Some of these drawings, some of these paintings you see might end up being like the inspiration for the actual shots. Once we have a number of blue sky drawings, we start our next phase of concept, which are production concept. Production concept basically are, we list out all the ideas that we need we need a concept. That includes main characters, secondary characters, crowds, prop, sets, even all the posters, the books, and the photographs that the character interact with in the movie all needs to be concepted out. All right. So for Last Bastion, we did something a little different. We've been challenged with a unique task of creating a forest. So here's a little bit of a workflow that we've gone through for Bastion. First, we have our blue sky painting. It looks beautiful. It's pretty much our opening shot, or the inspiration of the opening shot. And then our modeler will take a stab at creating this beautiful painting into a 3D environment. It looks really good, but it just feels a little busy. So our art director, Matthias, came up with a style guide, sort of try to help you understand what we try to do, what kind of story we try to tell, or like kind of guide your eyes to what we want you to see. So the concept artist did another paint over, incorporating some of the philosophy from the style guide. And the modeler did another pass, which looks much, much better, and that is our final shot. All right, so let's start storyboarding. Storyboarding is basically taking all the beats and drawing them on a piece of paper or on a computer. And that is a version of a beat boards that we did for Sombra episodes, Infiltration. It's a little bit more fleshed out than the one that I showed you earlier. At this point, we also involve our editorial department. We have two super talented editors working for the episodes. On the left, we have Jake Patton, and on the right, we have Nathan Schaff. I gave our editor a nickname, the Master of Time and Space, because they control the entire edit from the beginning of the episode all the way to the end. So back on the storyboard side, the storyboard artists start drawing all these storyboards in a rough pass, what we call the rough storyboards. It's just as it sounds. You draw as fast as you can, making sure all the ideas came across, and then we turn these boards over to our editor, and then we start our a 2D animatic. Basically, it's kind of like a movie that we incorporate all our storyboards in. With the edit, we start noticing there's certain parts that needs to be cleaned up a little bit better, or the idea needs to be fleshed out a little bit better. So we start doing our cleanup boards. Sometimes the artist will use color, sometimes gray shade. Basically, try to get the idea across as clearly as we can, as fast as we can. These new boards will eventually replace the rough boards in our animatic, and this time our editor will also include temporary sound effects, temporary dialogue, temporary music. So eventually our storyboard edit will look like this. That's pretty cool, right? There's a lot of work went into making these storyboard edits. A lot of drawings involved. So I did a rough count of how many boards I actually did for each of the episodes. And total 21,028 storyboards. That's a lot of storyboards. And just in case you're wondering what that looks like, that's 50 boards across. And so that's a lot of storyboards.
Luckily, paper is cheap.
Thanks, Kevin. So once we finish our storyboard edit, now we can start PREVIZ. PREVIZ are basically taking 2D storyboards and translating them into 3D space. We try to stay as close to the storyboard as we can, and depends on the sequence, we might cut out a shot, add a shot, or maybe combine 2 or 3 shots together, making one big monster shots. What we try to do is capture the essence that we try to create into these storyboards in 3D. All of our PREVIZ artists are camera experts. They're what we call the cinematographers. They're creating composition 3D that's going to try to match the storyboards. If not, they'll come up with even better ones. They'll use different lenses for characters. For example, Widowmaker, you don't want to shoot it with a wide lens. You want to shoot her with a long lens. You use a wide lens for showcasing crazy action sequences. During PREVIZ, we encounter what we call the real-world problem. For example, sometimes the set is too small to stage the fight, or the prop and the character doesn't match. Sometimes it's too big or too small. Maybe one character is too short compared to the other one. So these are great. It's a great place for us to find out these problems early on, so we can solve them in PREVIZ. It's a much cheaper process than actually try to solve them in production. So with that, that's pretty much the end of our pre-production, and I'm going to turn this back to Kevin.
Thanks, Ben. So it's pretty clear that we spend a lot of time in the animatic phase. And despite the fact it's a little counterintuitive when we have such a tight deadline, having all of those major story beats and all of the visual component worked out to that degree ahead of time really gives us a great advantage. And production's able to drill down and determine exactly what's going to be needed in terms of every shot, every character, every environment, and really just make sure that we don't overbuild, build specifically to what we know we're going to see in the short. Now, the process of creating those assets is something that Shimon Cohen is going to talk to you about today, and also elaborate a little more on the advantage we have of being so closely tied to the game world. So, Shimon?
Thanks, Kevin. Hey, guys. So one of our main goals was to make sure that the visual storytelling world we were creating, was as close to, if not very similar to, the existing in-game world. What we wanted to do was, we knew that the game team had already created the Overwatch world. We wanted to make sure the players, the fans, you guys, would instantly recognize the world as Overwatch, especially when viewing these episodes for the first time. So with that in mind, and in an effort to save some time and money in the process, both which we were in short supply on, we reached out to the game team and asked them pretty much for any assets that we could get. Characters, environments, weapons, we wanted them all. They were totally cool. They handed everything over to us. And the next step there was to basically convert all these assets into our pipeline. So we decided to start, so we basically found out that characters, while they looked extremely good in the game, did not convert as well when we tried to put them into our pipeline. As the game used normal maps extremely well, they were very tailor-made for game engines. These sort of maps just didn't hold up for us when we wanted to render them. We needed higher fidelity maps. Maps such as displacement. These sort of maps would allow us to push the details of these characters to a level we felt was appropriate for the episodes. So with that, we decided to recreate all the game models, all the existing heroes from the game using high-res meshes that the game team had already created for us. This ensured that we were actually able to keep an almost one-to-one translation between the in-game models, in-game characters, to the final game models that we created, the final episodic models we created. The next step we wanted to do is once these assets were completed, we would run them by the game team for any sort of final notes or feedback they might have for us, and ultimately get approval process from them. We also use this process for creating our unique original characters, such as NPCs, guards, Baby Winston, anything that we ultimately needed for the episodes didn't exist in the Overwatch world already. The next issue we noticed with characters was their hair. While the game employed geometry hair very well, extensively well, that custom shaders to really drive the overall look for these characters, we just weren't able to do that. We just weren't able to replicate this very well. The detail just didn't hold up for us. We then decided to apply hair grooms to all our episodic characters. Hair grooms are basically simulated hair systems that we build around the overall design of the existing geometry hair, be it the shape and the look itself, but when rendered, actually has hair strands as a final result. As you can see from these images, this really helped push the level of detail for these characters, but while still maintaining the overall look and design of the Overwatch. Here's an example of Baby Winston. As you can see over here, this really helped add that adorable cuteness factor we were always looking for when creating this character. Looking at him now, I mean, who wouldn't want to hug this little guy? Not all hair grooms were as successful. Here's Dr. Winston obviously having a pretty bad hair day, so yeah, not everything was as great as that. On the environment side, things were a lot better. We were able to reuse many of the existing assets from the maps. While we did have to remodel some assets, this really was just because there was close-ups or other specific requirements we needed from an episode itself. Ultimately, we were able to stay as true to the map layout and design as possible, as we really wanted the players, the viewers, to recognize some of these iconic areas they were very accustomed to when already playing the games. We wanted them to recognize this also when viewing these episodes. One exception to the asset reuse was Last Bastion. Here, no asset existed. There was no map for us to pull assets from. We had to recreate pretty much everything you see in these images from scratch. This obviously took a little bit longer on our end, but we feel that it turned out pretty awesomely. So with that, I'll hand you over back to Kevin.
Thanks, Shimon. Well, the Last Bastion being the obvious exception, we have assets and environments now that leverage as much as possible from the game world, and really puts us in a great spot from a production standpoint. But the team that really has to bring all of these assets to life now is the animation team. And to talk to you today about how they were able to accomplish that feat in less than half the time per shot for the cinematic trailer, I'm going to hand it back over to Corey.
Thank you, Kevin. What's up, guys? So from an animation standpoint, the Overwatch episodes were a pretty daunting task. We were going to be telling a much longer, more character-driven stories. And we were using a completely new animation style, and as Kevin had mentioned, all with, under a hefty time constraint. So we knew we were going to have to revise our approach a little bit. But if there's one thing our department does, and does very well, it's rise to a challenge. So we knew we were going to have to revise our character rigs. So the goal with our character rigs, we wanted them to be as close to real-time animation performance as possible, while still remaining intuitive and easy to use. And being that Overwatch was so performance-heavy, we spent a lot of time getting our face rig perfected. So all of our characters' heads, they're all modeled from one base mesh. The modeling team takes that base mesh, turns it into every one of our characters in Overwatch. So what this got us, this saved us a ton of time on the rigging side. It got the rigs into production very fast. So here's our final face rig. had all the features we were looking for. We could more or less do anything we wanted with it. But as you can see, it can start to go wrong pretty fast, and you could get off model real quick. And by off model, I just mean you're not gonna look at this character and be like, oh, yep, that's definitely Tracer. So here was a on model test, just Tracer running through some emotions, just seeing, making sure she stays looking like Tracer. But there was also some really cool things we could do with our new rig. We could almost make, totally new characters out of just the poses we're creating. And since our rig is completely unified across all of our characters, we can take this animation and we can put it on any one of our characters and it transfers. So with the episodes, we filmed a ton of video reference. The great thing about video reference is it helps you get a starting point for your shots, so you don't just like jump in and start animating. And another great thing is that our directors, one of our directors here is Jeremiah Johnson in the middle. He was playing our main thug. He would jump in, act with us, and he really gets into character. And you see, this is Sean Janik. He might actually be out here in the crowd somewhere. But he's on the left here. You see when Jeremiah yells? Sean actually jumped. That wasn't scripted. That was a real reaction. And it's moments like these when you see it in the final animation that, Sean didn't, copy the reference, but he took the essence and it made the shot all that much better for it. And going into Sombra, we knew she was going to be a very heavy challenge for us on the performance side. I mean, she needed to be confident and sly, yet cocky, and still playful. And this is Marika Valerie. She's one of our animators, and she totally nailed that playful, sly attitude. And you can see how it comes through in all the final shots. So also on our character rigs, we added what we call bendy bones. So these bendy bones gave us the ability to get super quick dynamic posing. And it also allowed us an animation technique, a technique that you see a lot actually in the game itself. You see it in the play of the games mostly, is a technique known as smear frames. So smear frames, they show up in just like one frame. It's like a blur of motion, but they really help to sell snappy, fast moving animation. And as you can see, this is very slowed down, but it doesn't exactly look like something that's physically possible. But when you see it in the final animation, the physicality works, and we get that snap to the animation we were after. So we also add the bendy bones to all of our props. We consider the props just an extension to all of our characters, so anything we can do to accentuate a pose or a line of action, we'll always do it. And going into the episodes, we knew these crowds in the live were going to be a very huge challenge for us. And it's not that we have not done crowds in past cinematics. We've done a lot of crowds before. But being that we had a brand new pipeline, we just weren't exactly sure how we were going to tackle it. So we came up with a new workflow using one of our tools known as the animation library. So our animation library, we could take any pose, any animation, put it in the library. Everybody on the team has instant access to it. And you can select any of these poses, any of these animations, put them on any character and any shot, and then they'll transfer right on. So these were all the animations we created for the crowds. And once we had them in our library, we could propagate them all the way down to all the other characters in the crowd. And with a huge collaboration with our layout department, we were able to get the shots built, and the crowds turned out great. So this was just a test animation we did on Dr. Winston early on, but this just shows we can take that animation from our library, transfer it to any character, doesn't matter their shape or size, and the animation will transfer, and it works pretty awesome. So everything in Blizzard Animation is a huge collaboration between departments. And we knew going into these shots on dragons that this was going to be a really big collaboration between animation and effects. So we tried to get a very rough first pass animation out. We had some temp timing, we had some temp effects, just enough to give our effects artists a bit of a springboard so they can start iterating as soon as possible. And once we get sign off from the director, we'll package this all up and send it down the pipeline to Bill in the effects team. And I'll hand you guys off to Bill. Thanks.
Thanks, Corey. So, whether it's transforming a character out of a cloud of smoke, unearthing a robot buried in dirt and plants, or creating dragons from the tip of an arrow, the effects team gets to create some of the magical elements that help bring our characters to life. When our job starts, we see something like this, and we help create the elements to turn it into something that looks like this. Because of the magical nature of the effects elements for the dragons, it was really important that we work closely with the animators, as the movement and the speed of the dragons would have a big impact on what the effects would look like. When we started development on the dragon effects, we started simple. One of our senior artists, Shuntaro Furukawa, helped us out here, and we did a test of attaching geometric curves to the body of the dragon and rendered those curves looking like blue smoke. So this is a first pass, very rough animation of the dragon, just to give us an idea if this technique would work. We start dialing in how much of the motion from the animation of the dragons would be influenced into the shape of the curves. So you see two different versions here. We might choose something that's kind of in the middle. And while we were happy with the results of this, it did have a few drawbacks. The smoke tends to travel along with the dragon, and we knew we needed something to live in the space around the dragon. So taking what we had here and taking these curves, we use that to emit particles. We run it through a pretty lightweight simulation, and we get a little bit more complexity, a little bit more of that magical feel. In addition to those two elements, we also create a kind of magical dust element, and that all gets combined to make up the dragon body effects. In addition to the body effects, we also were responsible for creating the lightning, the volumetric portal cloud, and also internal volumetric passes for the dragon bodies. All those elements were rendered out. We hand them down the pipe to the lighting and compositing team, and they put the shot together for us. So one of the things about the effects department at Blizzard is we really love to create awesome, jaw-dropping, complex effects. And one of the biggest challenges in doing these Overwatch episodes was how do we maintain that high-level standard and that complexity, but do it in a shorter amount of time. So, for example, we knew that we had Reaper in several episodes, and his smoke effects could be pretty complex. Now, typically when we create smoke, we do that using a 3D volume that is run through a simulation, oftentimes using fluid dynamics to give us a realistic result. And while that's a great method, it can be computationally very expensive, and it can take a long time to iterate. So we knew that we were not going to have the time to do that on all the shots. So we had to look for an alternative. Senior software engineer Chris Allen helped us out and developed a procedural technique that we call volume fill. And what volume fill does is it allows you to take a geometric surface, a curve, or particles, turn it into a volume, and with the controls dialed appropriately, it can start to look like smoke. So let me show you a simple example of a straight, static curve that's fed into volume fill. We start adjusting some of the noise parameters, We create a couple copies of that curve, and then we start to animate some of those parameters. And we get something that starts to look like smoke. And this does not involve any time-consuming simulations. No simulations at all, in fact. So to take this a step further, we can add a little bit more complexity to it, and we can apply this to curves and geometry, and we can also animate those curves and geometry before it goes into volume fill. Let me show you another simple example. We have a sphere that's animated. We build geometry based on the motion path of that sphere. We attach curves to it, and we add some dynamics into the curves. All of that is fed into volume fill, and we get this nice wispy smoke trail. So using this technique, I was able to apply that to Reaper's smoke transformation effects. Here's a test that we did very early on, before we had any animation to work with, and we thought it was pretty successful. So taking this, we're able to apply it to the shots out of animation. As funny as it may sound, we just asked the animator to animate Reaper flying across the scene and let effects replace him with a smoke trail. So taking this animation and then applying that volume fill technique, we get something that looks like this. So it took us a little bit of time to kind of dial in the settings and get the smoke kind of looking nice and wispy. But then when the director approved this and was happy with the look, we rendered out the element, we handed off to lighting and compositing, and they put the shot together. So in the final shot, the effect looks like this. Now, we're very pleased with the results. However, like I said, a procedural technique like this we knew would not work on all shots. If you guys saw the episode this morning, Infiltration, there's a shot that Reaper jumps down from a ledge and transforms into smoke. Now, a shot like this has a lot of character interaction with the smoke. The smoke interacts with the environment. So we had to go to a simulation technique. This is what we call a low-resolution simulation using some fluid dynamics. We're able to get a very nice overall shape to the smoke, some decent internal motion, but what we're lacking is detail. And to get detail, we could start turning up the settings on the simulation, go to a higher res. However, that can be very time-consuming. So we took an alternative method. Taking this simulation, we extract the velocity field out of the simulation. So all of the nice internal motion, and then we run a much faster, simpler simulation just using particles. And we use that velocity field to guide the motion of the particles. So this is not something that we invented. This is a technique. It's called particle advection. And in this example that you see here, there might be a couple thousand particles. So to get more detail, we simply add more particles to the simulation. We run additional simulations, and we add them all together in the end. So in the final shot for the smoke plume, we simulated and rendered over 40 million particles for the plume of smoke. And then we're able to take our volume fill technique, we attach it to Reaper, and we get the smoke coming at camera. So while we were able to streamline, simplify a lot of the effects in the episodes to make them go quicker, there are some effects that are just complex and they require complex solutions. In the last Bastion, when Bastion stands up for the first time, he's covered in dirt and moss and plants. And this is something that we knew we had to start development pretty early on. It was going to be very difficult. Senior effects artist at Sushi Ikarashi led the development on this. And this is using our animation package, Houdini, using its position-based dynamic solver. It's also called the grain solver. And what this test shows us is not only how the grains of dirt interact with each other, but also how they can interact with another simulated object in the scene, such as the plant roots. Now, seeing how promising this test was, we can introduce Bastion. So we take a first pass animation of Bastion standing up, cover him in some dirt particles, run it through the simulation, see what happens. Obviously, there's some problems, some instabilities in the simulation that we need to work out. But as we zero in on one area, we're able to stabilize things, and we start adding complexity. So the brown particles are representing simulated dirt, and the green particles are representing the moss, and then we have the plants attached to that. And one of the most difficult challenges that we had to solve here was when you're simulating different materials in the same simulation, because they interact with each other, of knowing which particles needed to be moss and which particles needed to be dirt, and getting the moss to sit on top of the dirt, and as the dirt crumbles and falls away, the moss stays attached and it follows with it. So as you can see, there's a lot of complexity here. Once we were happy with the simulation, that data from the dirt and the moss was then written out, fed back into the effects pipeline, and was used to simulate the plants on Bastion. So all in all, we simulated over 320,000 grains of dirt. And after that was run through a clustering technique to clump the dirt together into kind of natural dirt clumps, we outputted over 40 million particles that was then handed off to the lighting team for rendering. So here's a look at the dirt effects in the final shots from the last Bastion.
So now we have low overhead simulation techniques, procedural effects workflows, and all of which help to keep the effects team, their iteration time down so they can iterate faster. And as Corey mentioned, we have fast, flexible rig solutions for the animation team and a robust animation library for them to leverage so they can focus on what they do best. But we still have the question of how do we render this all? And to talk to you today about what it took under the hood to make that happen, I'm going to invite Shimon Cohen back up. Shimon?
Thanks again, Kev. So now that our new storytelling goals were set and we refined our pipeline, our next task was to find a rendering solution that would be able to achieve most of our goals, if not all of them. So after months of testing various renderers and looking around for any sort of new technology out there, we landed up with a relatively new renderer at the time called Redshift. Redshift is a biased renderer which is able to tap into the power of the GPU, your video card, to able to achieve lightning fast rendering. This is in contrast to much more traditional renderers which use the CPU, the processor, to do the same sort of the same sort of rendering, but at a much slower pace. One common issue with GPU renderers is scene complexity. GPU renderers are basically limited by the amount of RAM available on the actual video card itself. While this makes rendering complex scenes as this extremely difficult, we were able to get around this by using what Redshift has a feature called out-of-core rendering. This allows the renderer to basically use system RAM once the video RAM is all used up, allowing us to render what you see here, basically scenes of upwards of billions of polygons. Also, renders that used to take us hours to render were now taking us 5 to 10 minutes, which was an absolutely huge win when doing the stuff that we needed to do. Another great use for this feature is when you want to have a Dr. Winston party. As you can see here, we use Dr. Winston for pretty much all our testing. I don't know why that was, but we did. This fun fact about this image right here is that this was actually one of the really early tests we did when we wanted to find out how to do the crowds for the Alive episode. Ultimately, we used this, as you see here, but we replaced the assets, Dr. Winston's, with the assets from the Alive episodes, as Corey showed you earlier on. One last thing I wanted to show you guys was, now that we had our new technology, we had our refined pipeline, we really wanted to make sure that all of this stuff works prior to actually starting to do the work on Recall, our first episode. So here's a very early test we did to basically validate that all this was going to work for us.
Time is on my side.
And with that, I'll hand it back over to Kevin.
So faster renders mean more iterations, and frames that used to take hours, now taking minutes, mean that our artists can get feedback multiple times a day. And that's just a really great win for us. But it seems inevitable that the team that always feels the crunch the hardest when we approach our deadline is the lighting team. And so to talk to you today about how it is that they deliver under such a tight deadline, I'm going to invite Dan Cox up. Dan?
Hey guys, you ever been in a long line before and everybody behind you keeps pushing forward and you're getting pushed against something? That's pretty much our life every day in the lighting department. Since we're at the end, we're always getting pressed to get things done. So we knew that these episodes were going to be an even bigger challenge than what we normally run into. We were going to have a fraction amount of the time to do it, and we were going to have a lot more content. And our normal cinematics are between 40, 50 shots. This was going to be upwards to, I think our largest 125, 130 shots or something?
145.
145, there you go. So we knew it was going to be quick. But before I cover all that, I just want to let you guys see, you might have noticed that a couple of our characters went through minor design changes from the original launch piece that you saw a couple of years ago. Tracer looks a little different than she did before, just little things like bone structure and things like that. And we worked closely with the game team to kind of decide where that design was going to end, because when we did the original launch piece, the game, as you know, is still under development. And so moving forward, these were our characters. And Winston, as you'll see, kind of had the same thing. His hair was way scragglier in the launch piece, so we combed him a bit and made him a little neater for the moving forward. But we also had the same thing with Widowmaker and Reaper, but I just don't have examples up here for you. So as Shimon had talked about earlier with the modeling, we needed to up-res the environments. So as we went through, we kind of didn't want to blanketly do that because it just takes too much time to do that. And we wanted to try and be a little more strategic about how we did that. So oftentimes we would wait until we got into shot. And our surfacing team led by Mike Sandrick we would look at each of these with the director and say, you know, does it hold up, does it not hold up? You know, this is a chimney on the rooftops of Kings Row where you never go in the game. So they kind of decided, you know, yeah, we're going to take a stab and do an up-res on textures. Here's another example, again, at the top of Kings Row. And we kind of looked at the rooftops, we're like, it's not going to work. We got cameras right up on there, so we're going to take a pass at up-resing some of that stuff. And again, this is all on top of the models that have already been done. Here's a chimney. Guys kind of took a pass at up-resing, adding cracks and more structure to it. Same thing with the rooftop. We wanted it to be slightly wet and damp. You know, we're going to be adding a lot of atmospherics, and so our surfacing team went in and added, you know, a little grime up there, a little moisture on the rooftop. And all this stuff just helps pull the game assets in and give us the detail we need. We also knew we were going to need to up-res characters, but this was something we had to do blanketly. We didn't wait on this. Everything was preempted. So our surfacing team would go in, start with the actual game assets themselves, and then look at what needed to be adjusted and kind of up-res from there. A lot of time was spent on this. They would blow through it as fast as we could, but it does take time to go through this. And ultimately, we would look at these with the game team and get some feedback from them and work together on kind of where these final designs ended up, since they were leveled up a little bit. And our surfacing leads, Jung-Ha Baek, Sam Alicia, and Nathan Boyd did a really nice job of bringing these characters to life. And they had to hold up close because we knew we were going to get cameras a little closer than normal on these characters. I mean, for those of you who are familiar with the pieces, Dragons, for instance, we got a camera right up on Hanzo and Genji, you know, so we needed to make sure that the textures applied to these would hold up at that level, but still land in the design and not venture into something hyper-real like we would do in some of the other IPs. But ultimately, we were, you know, pretty happy with where these ended up, and you know, a lot of work goes into this stuff, but as you notice, the light rig here is this sunny day. We do this to neutralize all of our characters, so at any point down the road, we should be able to pull a character into a cinematic, and they'll just fall right into place in any lighting scenario we have. And here's our latest and greatest Sombra for those of you who saw our opening ceremonies. And I'd like to give a call out to Matthias Vereselt, who is the art director for all of the Overwatch cinematics, or all the episodes that we've done. And I would get to work closely with him, you know, month and a half leading up to each episode. And we would talk about inspirational images, stuff, and I'd kind of pick his brain, find out what he had in mind for the show. And he's doing some early concept work with the concepting team and some stuff himself. And ultimately, he's going to come up with these. And these are what we call our production paintings. We generally do between, I don't know, 6 to 15 of these on a show. I think our max had about 20. But generally, it's around 6 to 8, I should say. And Matthias paints very, very well. And this informs our team incredibly. We try and have all these done by the time our lighting lead gets on the show, so he has something to a target to really build around. And we'll spend a few weeks trying to dial some shots, and we'll all work together on what we call our key shots. And in those, we'll try and sometimes hit as literally as possibly as we can to the paintings. Sometimes not. It kind of all depends on the actual individual show. Sometimes the still image doesn't work when you start moving it, you know, and sometimes other compromises are made along the way. Here on the left, you'll actually see these are production paintings on the left, and on the right are actually still frames from the shot from the actual cinematic itself. And as you see, we're pretty literal a lot of times, except like on the top here, you'll notice the color temperature of the sun changes. And all that stuff is done intentionally and collaboratively together with the art director on these key shots. But as you can see, we do spend time trying to match these as close as possible to you know, capture what the art director wanted us to achieve. And ultimately, you end up with really cool worlds. How many of you out there actually play Overwatch? All right, cool. So you'll know that Gibraltar, which you know is where the Winston's lab, it's the spawn point on attack. It takes place during the day. That's a day map. So on a few of these, we actually got the opportunity to go in and change the day to night or night to day. And it was kind of pretty cool to see what Winston's lab would actually look like at night. Or, you know, you could check out our Hanzo piece here. In Dragons, Hanamura is also a day map, but we kind of got to go in and see what that would look like at night. And our Digimat team got to give us this really great vista in the background. Anthony Aftakari and Fabio Zangrone did really nice work there. And then here's a kind of an example I wanted to show for you guys in terms of how affects lighting. Bill and the effects team, you know, would pass us these effects, and we oftentimes, using some of the tech, I don't want to go into it and bore you, we can bring the effects into our actual scenes itself and light our scenes. So we're not actually faking all of this. A lot of this is actually the effects themselves illuminating the scene. So it's kind of cool to see that. And then ultimately, we also ended up in Volskaya, where there is part of the map that exists. A lot of our action was going to take place up in the scaffolding where it didn't exist. So we kind of got to experiment with that and come up with something that looked pretty cool. So we were pretty happy with it in the end. Thank you, guys.
So that's really what it took to overhaul our pipeline to create all the amazing imagery that you've seen over the last year. But we're not quite done yet. There's still the question of what we hear. So to talk to you today about how that experience is created, there's no one really more attuned to it than our director, Ben Dye.
Thank you, guys. So whether you're watching a movie in a theater, watching a favorite TV show on a TV, or YouTube video on a computer, half the experience came from visual, and the other half came from sound. So let's talk about sound design. Right here we have our sound designer, Paul, and our sound producer, Caroline. Hard at work. Woohoo! All right. So our sound designer got the tough job of creating unique sound effects for some of our very strange or unique situation when we put our character through. For example, in Alive, when Tracer rewind time, or in Dragons, when Genji cut an arrow in half in slow motion. or here's the big one, the epic battle scene in Bastion's flashback sequence. Right. So music plays a very vital role in helping reinforce the emotional beats that we try to create in our movies. For our episodes, we get to work with a group of very extremely talented composers, which include Neil Akri, which I see you over there. Hello, Neil. Sam Carden, I don't know if he's here or not, and our very own Derek Duke. Typically, me and the composer will get together right after we finish our storyboard edit. That's the time when we show the composer our edit, and basically he gets the feel of what kind of emotional beats that needs to be in place for the score. So for Last Bastion, it's a unique case because there's no dialogue. It's pretty much a silent film. So sound effects and the music did a lot of heavy lifting, try to create emotional beats alongside with the visuals. So now that we have our music recorded, sound effects ready to go, all our pictures are rendered, it's time for the last stage of a production, which is mixing. Where Paul, our sound designer, always accused of me, mixing is basically covering up all his sound effects work. It's not true, not all the time. Human ear can only hear a certain spectrum of sound. That space gets quickly filled by all the sound effects and the music. So the mixer has a tough job of finding carving spaces for dialogue and everything else in the mix. Mixing is basically juggling between sound effects, music, and dialogue. And in a great mix, you should be able to hear all the dialogue all the way through and be able to follow the music, even though it's dipping, so that we can carve room out for, say, the dialogue or the sound effects. And you should be able to feel the sound effects. I'm not talking about the big explosion, the bass rumbling sound that you can feel, but the ambience, the nuances that our sound designer put in to basically transport you guys, the audience, into the world of the story that we try to tell. So with that, that's pretty much the end of our production cycle. Back to you, Kevin.
It's hard to believe it's only been a year since the episodes were first announced right here at BlizzCon in 2015. Since then, we've released 6 episodes, which cumulatively add up to over 40 minutes of original content, which is just absolutely incredible. But none of it would have been possible without the support of all of the fans out there. And the community reaction has been fantastic. From the crowd at Gamescom, who just gave it the most heartwarming reaction ever to The Last Bastion, to the reaction right here today for Infiltration, which just absolutely blew us all away. None of it would have been possible without you guys, so give yourselves a big round of applause. There's a lot of stats out there that I could share with you today that sum up just how successful the episodes have been, but none of them, I think, are more staggering than this one. You know, in the last year, over 42 million viewers have watched the episodes for a total of over 3 million hours collectively. It's just mind-blowing when you think about it. But what did it take to create all that content in the end? Well, during the production process, we rendered over 4.3 million frames with all the iterations of each and every shot in the episodes, which took over 580,000 hours of GPU time to render. That's 6.5 proc years if you put all of the iterations on one machine, on one graphics card. So, yeah, it's pretty staggering. But none of it would have been possible without these people, the hardworking men and women of Blizzard Animation. So please join me in giving them a big round of applause.
Thank you for attending the Overwatch Animated Shorts panel. Up next, the StarCraft II multiplayer panel.
And thank you all for coming out. Appreciate it.